and welcome to the Thank You for Knitting YouTube channel. My name is Alana, and this is normally a channel where I do a knitting podcast, but I also like to do topic videos on knitting related or fiber arts related themes. And so today, this has been a highly requested video and one that I've been wanting to do for a very long time, but I sort of had to get my thoughts organized around the topic because it is sort of a big topic. But I've tried to organize it in a way that will hopefully be as useful as possible. So today we're talking about how to get the most out of Ravelry. And I realized when I was sort of preparing this topic that there are a couple of different angles I could talk about Ravelry from. And one of them is being a designer who sells my patterns on Ravelry. But I thought I would leave that completely out of this video because it's just too much. That could certainly be its own video and maybe will in the future. But today I just want to talk about how to get the most out of Ravelry as a knitter, as a general maker and user of the site. So starting from the very beginning, Ravelry is a website that if you're into knitting or crocheting, you've probably heard of it or used it. But in case you haven't, Ravelry is a website that I would consider primarily to be a database of patterns for both knitting and crochet. There's a ton of other functions as well. It can serve as a personal sort of notebook or journal, a place where you can save and curate things that you like, make plans. There's a whole social element where there are forums and chats and people doing knit-alongs and hangouts in different sort of forum groups, I guess. And there are a few other functions, but primarily it is a website to get knitting patterns and crochet patterns from. I am primarily a knitter, so throughout this video I'm going to be talking about it more from the perspective of a knitter. However, a lot of these tips will apply similarly if you crochet. Some of them probably won't, but I don't crochet that much, so I can't speak as much to the crocheters out there. Sorry. So today I want to talk a lot about how to find patterns on Ravelry because there are so many patterns on there and it can be overwhelming if you don't know how to use the filters and the search terms and everything in a way that is optimal. After we talk about filters and finding patterns and all of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about the personal notebook side because I use that heavily to keep track of all of my projects. So I'll just show you a little bit how you can do that and a little bit how you can use the favorites function as well, because that's also something I use quite heavily for myself. And maybe touch on a few other things, but we'll see how we go. So I'm hoping this is a reasonably comprehensive guide to getting the most out of Ravelry as a user and a maker. Now, part of what has motivated me to make this video is I'm someone who has owned a yarn shop for 6.5 years, and so I have used Ravelry very extensively, and I've also had the benefit of interfacing with real-life knitters a lot in the shop, and my idea of what most knitters were like before having the shop was very, very different to what I've learned now interacting with so many people. We carry printed patterns in the shop. However, no matter how many printed patterns we carry, it seems that it's impossible to have everything that everybody wants. And so we use Ravelry a lot in the shop. And Ravelry have a fantastic program called in-store sales. And this means that if you are a local yarn store, you can sign up to be part of the in-store sales system. And basically all that means is that people can buy the Ravelry patterns through the shop, and a percentage of the money goes to the shop and a percentage goes to the designer. The buyer pays the same amount of money either way, but it's hugely useful for us because we get a lot of customers coming in who either don't know how to use Ravelry, haven't really heard of it before, or they're overwhelmed by it, or we just have customers who are comfortable with Ravelry, but maybe they don't own a printer at home, so no worries, they come in our shop, we help them find a pattern, purchase it through the store, and print it out for them. And so that's quite handy. And so as a yarn store owner, Ravelry is fantastic because it is essentially, I would say, the biggest database of knitting patterns that is out there. I can't speak to the crochet world again, but Ravelry, I think, has the most comprehensive selection of knitting patterns anywhere on the internet. I know you can buy patterns on Etsy, some patterns, you can buy patterns on individual websites of designers and yarn companies, But Ravelry is this huge database because the majority of what is published by independent designers or yarn companies or patterns that are published in books and magazines, they almost all end up on Ravelry in one way or the other. Sometimes you have to click a link through Ravelry and buy the pattern elsewhere. Sometimes you can buy it on Ravelry. But the majority of patterns that are out there for knitting will have some kind of presence on Ravelry. So it's just a massive database. And we do encounter a lot of customers who say that they are overwhelmed by it because they go on there, there's so many patterns, they don't know where to start or what to look for or sort of how to filter their search. They get overwhelmed and then sort of give up. I've even had customers come in and say, you know, I ask them, have you heard of Ravelry? And they say, oh, yeah, I looked at what Ravelry had and I didn't like the style of pattern that they had to offer, or they didn't have what I was looking for, which to me actually says you need help learning to use it properly, because there are more than 1 million patterns on Ravelry. So if you filter your searches in the right way, you can find almost anything that you are looking for. So in the first part of this video, I just want to walk you through, from my perspective and kind of my experience interacting with customers, some of the most useful ways to try to filter your search and find the patterns that you're looking for on Ravelry. So I'm doing something I've never done before, which is screen record my computer. And I'm trying to sort of film myself while recording the computer, and I'm gonna be talking and I'm gonna be doing stuff on the computer. So I hope that this works out well, but I think the only way to really explain how to get the most out of Ravelry is really by walking you through it and by showing you what it looks like on the screen. So I'm going to do that now. Okay, I've just started the screen record, so hopefully if this works, you will be seeing my computer screen in front of you. So right off the bat, you need to create an account in order to use Ravelry. It is completely free to create an account. It doesn't really require anything from you. You just need to put in your email or make a username, make a password, and log in. That's all. It's free. It's easy. So no barrier to entry there. And so if you haven't logged on, this is what your screen will look like. It remembers me, so that's my login information. So I'm gonna skip, I'm not gonna walk you through signing up. It is very easy to do. You would go here and you would sign up. It's sort of the same as signing up for a free account for any website. It's pretty straightforward. So I'm just going to log in. Now the homepage that you will see is just this kind of blog style section where someone who works there every few months or so throws up a little blog post with some different kind of theme and inspiration, whatever that may be. But the vast majority of the time when I log onto Ravelry, the very first thing I do is go straight to the advanced search button and click it. And so when we're helping customers find find patterns in Ravelry, this is also what we do. We go straight to the advanced search. Now, a lot of people go, I'll just sidebar quickly to say, a lot of people go first to this patterns page. And this is some people's preference, I'm sure. You can see what someone is advertising. You can see some new things. It starts to get you into the hot right now thing. And some people probably use this a lot. There's a couple of things on here, but typing things into the search bar, I don't find is the best way to actually find what you're looking for. So personally, I just don't really click there. I just always go to the advanced search, because it brings me what I really want, which is this sidebar here that has a ton of different filters. And that's the primary way that I find what I'm looking for. So the first thing that makes a huge difference is how you sort your search. So you can see, first of all, there are more than 1 million patterns on here, about 1.5 million. Clearly that's a lot of patterns. Now, I personally sort it by hot right now. It kind of gives you what's popular, what's new, that kind of thing. Another option is you can sort by most popular. This is also quite useful. This is showing you what is most popular with Ravelry users over time. However, hot right now is going to give you newer patterns, stuff that people are interested in right now. That's just the search term that I generally prefer to use. You can see that if you search by, let's say, publication date, it's going to be a lot more random. You're going to get things that don't have a picture. Well, I guess right now we're just getting a lot of stuff from this particular designer because they must have just published a bunch of new things. But you'll get different kinds of things, you know, whatever somebody has just published now. Or if you search, let's say, random order, again, you know, more random kind of miscellaneous ideas. And so you can see that how you filter your search is going to make a huge difference. And because there's obviously so many patterns out there, you want to make sure, you know, there's 2,000 pages. You're not going to click on all 2,000 pages. So you want to make sure that the pages that you're getting first are the ones that are most likely to be actually giving you what you want. So that is my first tip, is search by either hot right now, most popular, or you could probably use best match. Whenever I switch between hot right now and best match, they seem to be more or less the same, so not sure it really matters a whole lot, but I just use hot right now. And then the next most important tip that I tell people in the shop is I don't often type words into the search bar because you're not going to get the most accurate results. For example, if you want, let's say, you want to knit a DK weight raglan style pullover sweater. You know, you can write in raglan pullover DK weight. I don't know, I never do this, so I don't know what we'll come up with. So there are some things that are probably relevant. There's also things like this, which is a tank top, a mesh kind of summer shirt, you know, fair enough, you're getting some things, although I only got 25 matches. So typing words in, you can see, severely reduced the amount of results that I got. So I'm going to clear that search. So I think good etiquette with Ravelry is not to rely on words in the search bar. Because, for example, a lot of knitting patterns have a name that is totally unrelated to the features of the pattern. So you may not get what you're looking for just by putting the words into the search bar. So the only time I really use the search bar is if I'm looking for something very specific. I think at some point I was looking to see if there were any patterns out there with poppy flowers on them. So there's not going to be a specific filter for poppy flowers. So that might be a reason to use the word search, but for the most part, I ignore the word search and I jump to my filters. So let us talk about the filters. So the first most basic filter is category. The most broad thing that people generally want to use is the category, because if we have a customer come in, sometimes someone has no idea what they want in it, but most of the time someone comes in and says, I'd love to make a pullover or whatever, or I'd love to make a hat or something like that. So you want to go into the category section. Now, if you want to make any kind of clothing item, you click here. The ones that we end up using the most are generally sweaters, either in the form of cardigan or pullover, or tops, which could be t-shirts, sleeveless tops, summery type items. Let's just say our customer wants to make a pullover. Sweater, pullover. Now, the next thing you may not think of if you're not a yarn shop owner, a lot of internet-based knitters, especially nowadays, straight away get into circular needles and circular knitting. But in our yarn shop, we have two different types of customers. We have customers who knit everything in circular needles, which is what I do. And we have a whole other group of customers who only knit on straight needles, so they want to knit the more, I guess we could call it, a traditional way, with straight needles and knitting everything in separate pieces and then seaming them together. So I have learned over the years to ask the customer this early on, because you could spend a lot of time doing a search for pullovers, and especially if you're filtering by hot right now, a lot of what you're finding on the front page is going to be circular knitting, because that's certainly more popular nowadays from what I've seen. But if we have a customer who I ask them, oh, do you use circular needles, or do you knit with straight needles? And if they say straight needles, well, I better go straight down to the filter, which is construction. Now it's a little tricky because, for example, you could be knitting a cardigan on circular needles and it would be considered worked flat. So this is not a perfect science, but I would typically go down here and select seamed, and I would also select worked flat. if this is a customer who wants to use straight needles and work in separate pieces. So it's a little trickier to find because I know, for example, that this item, she's probably classified it as worked flat and worked in the round, because I think you work the top portion flat and then you would work the rest of it in the round. So this would not work for a customer who is only working flat. So I won't dwell too long on this working flat thing, although it does definitely limit what you can find on Ravelry. I have a couple of just go-tos. So Brooklyn Tweed have a ton of amazing patterns, and I think, yeah, the vast majority of their patterns, because they were a yarn company, their patterns were written in the more traditional way, where they were generally worked flat and pieced. So if I know a customer wants that, I might just bypass this whole situation and just find Brooklyn Tweed or even a Rowan pattern. A lot of the Rowan patterns are also done in the traditional way, worked flat. But let's just assume our customer wants to work in the round, because that's certainly what I prefer and what a lot of people do nowadays. So they want to make a pullover. In that case, I'm going to ignore filtering the construction, because the majority of what you're going to see on the first few pages is going to be worked in the round anyway. So they want to make a pullover. They are an adult, let's say, so they want to make an adult-sized pullover as opposed to child, baby, etc. I generally wouldn't jump straight to filtering for ease. A lot of people, I find, don't necessarily know the amount of ease that they want. They will see in the picture if they like the look of it and then decide based on that. So I don't generally filter for that unless a person is really looking for something specific. Even with gender, I wouldn't typically filter for that unless they're specifically asking for a male pattern, because the majority of the patterns on Ravelry are made for female proportions, and then there's a handful that are classified as unisex, and there's a smaller proportion that are intended for male body proportions. So I would potentially just skip this for now. Let's assume our customer is a female. I think 95% of our customers are. It's just the statistics. And so yeah, we'll just say we want an adult pullover. Maybe they're a newer knitter, or yeah, let's say they're a newer knitter and they aren't sure what weight of yarn to use. Well, most newer knitters, let's say they're making their first sweater, I'm probably not going to recommend a fingering weight or 4-ply sweater, just because it takes longer, and a lot of people for their first sweater, they want to go a little thicker, maybe DK, worsted, or Aran, or even bulky. For the purpose of this search, I want to shy away from super bulky, because for me that's kind of another kettle of fish. Super bulky, you have to have really chunky needles. I find it a little harder on your hands. I don't necessarily recommend that for beginners. That is a preference thing. If they like that, I will help them find that. Otherwise, I think bulky, Aran, worsted. In New Zealand, we have a lot more DK weight yarn than worsted, and a DK in New Zealand is more similar to a US worsted weight. So I'm just going to select DK as well. And then they might have a little more information about what they want. They might say, so this attributes is very useful. You know, if someone specifically wants a stranded colorwork sweater or mosaic colorwork or intarsia, construction can be quite useful. So you could select for bottom up or top down, and seamless, you know, that kind of stuff. We'll just ignore all that for now. Design elements, this might be useful because a customer might come in and not be sure what they want. So I would maybe leave the search as it was. But if they know for sure, I definitely want, oh no, not collar, a neck. Let's say they definitely want a V-neck. Great. And they might also know what type of sleeve they want. If they're a newer knitter, they maybe aren't sure what they want, so we'll ignore that for now. And there's a lot of detail you can get into. So if you are just really keen on finding something with bust darts or something with embroidery, or let's say an empire waist, you know, there's a lot of really specific things you can look for. But for the most part, I would avoid those highly specific search terms, because if you select too many search terms, you're going to basically have no results. So currently we're just looking for a V-neck pullover in a medium-ish weight yarn. I'm going to ignore the yardage. I'm going to ignore the needle size, because the needle size will just be based on the weight of the yarn. I'm going to ignore that for now, although that is interesting. because you can be doing a search within your own library or within your own projects or favorite designers, but we'll ignore that. Craft, I would always just select knitting here in this case because we're not looking for crochet. Availability, so sometimes it is useful to filter out the ones that are discontinued or not available, because you can spend a lot of time looking for a pattern for a customer and they find one they love and then you realize, oh, it's discontinued or not available, and that's a bummer. So sometimes I would select Ravelry download, purchase online, free, etc. I'll just ignore it for now because I know that the first few pages are going to have, for the most part, available patterns. Now, you can certainly filter for free patterns. That is an option, especially let's say if we're talking about a beginner. I know that some people prefer the idea of using a free pattern. I think sometimes there is value in a free pattern if you're a newer knitter because you are hesitant to spend money. However, I also tend to feel that, from what I've seen, there are some free patterns out there that are good quality, but there is a much more mixed bag of what's available when it's free. Because the pattern is being offered for free, there is a chance it has not been tech edited or tested at all. It might have errors and mistakes, it might be confusing or just not well written. And if you're a beginner, you don't really know how to navigate that very well. And so if you are trying to save, $5, and so you get a free pattern and it's confusing and not well written, it's going to be a very frustrating knitting experience. And so while some free patterns are lovely, and there are some specific designers who make high quality free patterns like Pearl Soho, and I think Tin Can Knits have a few free ones that are quite well written. Otherwise, it's just a little more dangerous looking in the free category. It's much more, the Wild West out there. Anyway, there is a time and a place for free patterns, and there's a time and a place to purchase a pattern as well. So for now, I'm going to ignore that. I almost always select has photo because if there is no photo of the pattern, how do I know if I want to knit it? So I just want to filter out all of that stuff right away. Meterage is a useful search term. However, for the purpose of this current search, we're going to ignore it because we don't want to limit ourselves by the meterage. Now, this is most useful if, let's say, you already have yarn that you've purchased, you have yarn in your stash, and you know that you have, 400 meters of fingering weight yarn. Well, this is a great search for that. That's when you're looking for a pattern to suit your yarn. So that's when you would want to select maybe these 3 to find patterns that you could make potentially under 400 meters of yarn. You would select these filters, you would also select the fingering weight filter, and then you would be off to the races. Colors used can be useful. So if you know you want to do a 1-color sweater, great. The majority of what we've got here are. If you know you have 2 colors that you want to use, but for now we'll just ignore that. Fiber content is also sometimes useful, but most of the time I just ignore this because I don't always use, or I often don't use the recommended yarn, so I don't really want that to limit me in the style of item I find. And I want to also speak briefly on the difficulty rating. This can be useful if you are a beginner or you're helping a beginner find a pattern. You can filter for the piece of cake, the easy, even unknown. You can see the vast majority of these are classified as unknown. So if you were to select these 2, you would be severely limiting yourself. The other just comment I want to make about the difficulty rating is this is not a rating that is set by any kind of standard system. This is also not a rating that is set by the designer. This is compiled from if there are people who have used the pattern and have left their own rating on it. That's how this is determined. So I find it can be very subjective because what's easy for one person might not be easy for another person, or what one person says is difficult might not be difficult for another person. So I personally tend to avoid this. I just find it's highly subjective, and I kind of know at this point what to look for anyway, so I don't want this to limit my search. Language, yarn held together. I also generally avoid this because a pattern might be written for fingering and mohair held together, which equals a DK weight at a particular gauge, but you could also knit that pattern with just a single strand of DK weight yarn if you can meet the gauge. So I'm not too fussed about the recommended number of strands held together. And then there's some really interesting search options down at the bottom here that I want to quickly mention because a lot of people miss these or don't know that they're here. They can be very useful. So there's a couple I want to shout out. So designer country, that's a fun one. We have done, I'm going to open a new tab actually so we can come back to our current search. We did a knit along this year called the Kiwi Make Along. And the idea was to use an item that was designed by a designer based in New Zealand. So this was a fun search. Designer country, if I select New Zealand, still filtering by hot right now, so that's useful. So we're finding, ooh, my sock pattern. And yeah, everything we're finding here, which are 6,900 matches, are designed from someone based in New Zealand. So I think that's fantastic because, you know, when we were doing our Kiwi Make Along, I found some new patterns from designers that I had never heard of before, and I had no idea that they were living right here in this country. So that's a fun search to do, is designer country. Let's clear that search and talk about a few other fun features. Now, another one that I like to use quite often here is suggested yarn name. This is another one that not a lot of people always know about, but if I have a specific yarn in my stash, especially a yarn that is unique in its fiber content maybe, or in its gauge, it can be really useful, or even if I'm just looking for inspiration, you know, around that yarn on what I could make with it, it can be really useful to look for patterns that specifically recommend the yarn that you have. So let's just say I have some Rowan felted tweed. Write that in there. Apply the search term. Cool. Now I'm getting loads of stuff that was designed for Rowan felted tweed. And you're gonna see a lot of different options. You could obviously take that Rowan felted tweed, and in addition, you could start filtering for, let's say I just wanna find a hat in Rowan felted tweed. Cool, I'm gonna get beautiful colorwork options from Marie Wallen, etc., etc. So that is a fun way to search for a suggested yarn. Now let's hop back to our original search that we made with our hypothetical customer. Medium weight-ish, adult size, V-neck, pullover, in the knitting category, has a photo. Filter by hot right now. So now we're getting lots of beautiful V-neck options. One with cables, one with color work, one with lace. Lots of beautiful V-neck options. Now let's say our hypothetical customer says, ooh, I love these ones with cables all over them. I definitely want to knit some cables. Okay, great. We can narrow our search even further. We can go to fabric characteristics and select cables. So now we're just going to get a bunch of beautiful V-neck cabled sweaters. Oh, I like that one. So yeah, let's say we click into one of them. I really like the look of this one. You can click to see the photo a bit better. Now, there's always a series of photos that ideally give you a good sense of what the pattern looks like on a person. And if you like the look of that fit, that has a certain amount of positive ease, for example, then you can learn a lot of information about the pattern. So that's the designer. These are the yarns that they are recommending. These are the needle sizes and the gauge that they're recommending, so that's important. Knitting is all about gauge, so they're using a lace plus a bulky held together, and they're achieving this gauge. You could use, let's say, one strand of bulky that's slightly bulkier. If you can achieve this gauge, that could work. Or let's say you have two strands of DK weight held together. That might work as well, as long as you can meet this gauge. You would want to make a gauge swatch on the recommended needle to make sure you can hit the gauge. And then there's typically a lot of information down here. So let's say we want to see, oh, this is a recent pattern. So we don't have a ton of project pages, but this is another really useful thing to look at. If you look at the projects associated with the pattern, you can see other people who have made this pattern. Perhaps this person has made it, let's say, in a color scheme that you like, this beige color, and it helps to envision what this sweater would look like in that beautiful color. You can just see different sizes, different fits, different people wearing it. And some people even write little notes in their project page explaining sometimes the difficulties they had with the pattern, or they'll say this was a great pattern, or they'll explain modifications that they made to the pattern. So that's really, really useful. I want to show you that function really quickly on a more popular pattern. Not to say that pattern isn't going to be popular, but it looks very new, so it doesn't have a lot of projects yet. Let's pick the Sabai top by Susan Mueller. This is one I've been looking at recently. It is a popular summer tank top pattern. And if you click on the projects here, you've got more than 5,000 people who have knit this project. So this is very, very useful. You've got someone who has added stripes or a little colorwork stripe to it. You've got different versions in different colors to look at. You've got a multicolored version here. A lot of people will post a photo of them wearing it so you can see how it fits and how it looks on. That can be quite useful. Something that I like to do quite a lot, especially if there's a lot of projects, is I click advanced search here and I filter it by most favorites, because then I'm most likely to find the project pages that other people have added to their favorites. So these are probably going to be project pages with good photos and maybe helpful notes. So that is the basics of using the filters. I hope that that is useful enough. I think it's finding the right balance between using the filters that are helpful, not overdoing the filters and limiting your search too much. Above all, making sure that you are sorting your results in a way that is going to be the most useful. And yeah, utilizing, the project pages and all of those resources to get a good sense for if you want to dive in and make something. Oh yeah, and I guess I should just briefly mention this right here is what shows you that it's available on Ravelry. If you find a pattern that doesn't have this box right here, unfortunately, that means it's not available. But like I was showing you earlier, you can filter out so you won't get those results. And then if you want to buy the pattern, you just click here, buy it now. I'm not going to follow through now because I don't know if I'm going to use this pattern or not, but I would click pay with PayPal. And you, even though you're paying using PayPal, this is another question we've had in the shop, you don't actually have to have a PayPal account. You can enter your credit or debit card details directly into the PayPal system without having a PayPal account. So don't worry about that. But you would just pay with PayPal, etc. And then it would automatically be ready to download. It also automatically puts it into your Ravelry library. And that brings me very nicely to the next thing that I want to go through, which is this whole notebook section of Ravelry and how to use that. So let's move on to that. So this is my particular account, and this is my notebook. Because of owning a yarn shop, I have meticulously kept track of all of my knitting projects here on Ravelry for years now. It has proven to be very, very useful because a lot of the samples that we have in the shop are ones that I've knit, and even though we do write a little bit of info on the tag of each sample, it's also really nice to be able to just hop over to my project notebook and get more information there. So the first section here is projects. I'll click on that. Now I currently have 461 projects logged in Ravelry. Some of these more recent ones don't have a photo just because I haven't taken a photo yet, but I try to keep on top of the photos. I'll usually throw in one sort of work in progress photo, and then when I finish the project, I will put in a finished project photo. So here is a recently finished project that I did, which is a sample for the shop. I've kept track of the needle size that I used. There aren't multiple sizes, but you could keep track up here of the size. It's got the category of the product. I have marked down the start and end dates, so I know that this took me about a week to knit. And I have taken note of each of the colors of yarn that I've used for this project. Now, I do get a little bit behind with yarn amounts in my projects. So I have a little pile of recently finished leftovers from projects, which eventually I go through the pile and I weigh everything. So eventually I will update this and it will say that I used, let's say, 0.25 skeins of the first color, 0.3 skeins of the next color, etc. So I like to do that so I actually know exactly how many meters I used. I haven't done that yet because this is a pretty recent finish, but let's find an older finish of mine and see if I've done it. Oh yeah, here is a sweater that I knit January of this year. I've linked to the pattern, so if you're here in my project page and you like the look of my project, you can click on the pattern that I've linked. I'm going to open it in a new tab and you can see, oh, that's the pattern. I have written down the 3 needle sizes that I used, and I have weighed exactly the amount of yarn that I've used. So I used 5.22 skeins of spin cycle, which is a total of 955 meters of our shop color of spin cycle. And this is, I find, very helpful for other knitters because I think when I calculated based on the pattern, I thought I would need about 7 skeins, and I ended up using less than 6. So this is quite useful if someone else was going to knit the same project as me in a similar size. As you can see, I have been tracking my projects for years. There are so many projects in here. Now, a couple of fun features to look at when it comes to your project pages. These are all my projects. You can look at your index and you can see exactly how many of each category you've done. So in 2024, I completed 64 projects. 2023 was the same, etc., etc., etc. This year, 31 so far. I've made 7 vests. I've made 87 sweaters. Oh my gosh. 27 cardigans. So this is fun to see. That is the basics of the Ravelry project pages. So I don't have a knitting journal of any kind physically that I use regularly. Part of this is I change my plans a lot, and so if I was handwriting things in a notebook, I would end up scribbling, ripping out pages. You know, I change my mind a lot. So I find this to be, for me, the best way to keep track of all of my projects. Let's move on quickly to look at these other functions that are inside of the notebook section. So queue, this is one that people use differently. I always have a queue running and it's always just full of things that I'm currently really into that I want to knit. However, like I said, I change my mind all the time, and by no means is this a commitment that I will knit that thing. These are just things that I'm really interested in right now and that I'm hoping I want to cast on soon, but I might change my mind later. So I update my queue relatively frequently, just whenever I feel like it. If I'm just sort of, knit dreaming and looking at ideas and getting inspired, I'll just shuffle things around in my queue. But currently, this is the next one I want to cast on, blouse number 1, and the core sweater by Pearl Foundry. She sent me the pattern for that. I'm really ready to cast that on too. I've got the yarn. That's how I use my queue. So I don't let it get too out of hand. I have currently 22 items in there. And as soon as I decide I don't want to make something anymore, I'll just delete it from the queue. So I keep that kind of small and relatively current. Now, the stash function I will mention because that's one that a lot of people use. I don't use this for the majority of my yarn stash just because I have a very big stash and there's a decent amount of comings and goings from my stash when it comes to shop yarn. So I have just found that that's not something I want to keep on top of personally. I have my stash visible and organized, and that's good enough for me. So the only stash yarn that's in my stash is my Handspun because it goes there automatically when you create a spinning page for it and then you finish it. So this is my current stash of Handspun. Before I move on from the stash section, I don't use it, but it is very, very useful because if you do have, let's say, this is my Jumbuck Jumble, which is some Handspun. So I know that I have 928 meters total of this beautiful Handspun that I made this year. And that's incredibly useful because I can look for a project that uses somewhere around that amount of yarn. And if I know what I have, that's a really great function. So if you have a huge stash, especially if it's packed away in closets and you're not really sure what's what, if you have it all in here, it's actually super useful because you can go back to to the advanced search, and if you have yarn in your stash, it'll actually pop up and recommend it to you if you're on a pattern that would work for your stash. So it's very, very useful. And then briefly Handspun. This is just where I keep track of all the spinning projects that I'm doing, and that's quite nice. I am not super detailed with my spinning notes. I just keep track of what was the fiber, what's the approximate wraps per inch, grams, meters, etc. Tools, I also don't use this, but you could theoretically keep track of all of the knitting tools that you own. And then I'm gonna briefly jump into library, and then I'm gonna talk about favorites. And that'll be the last thing. So library is all the patterns that I currently have in my library. So this includes patterns that I have purchased on Ravelry. Obviously my own patterns are in my library too. I've added them into there. This also includes books that I have purchased physically. I manually added these in. I went to the page for the book and I said, this is in my library. And this is incredibly useful, and I'll show you in a minute why this is so useful. But basically this has, the books that I have entered in, the magazines that I own, and then single patterns that I have purchased. And so this is extremely useful, and I actually use this feature all the time because you can go to advanced search, click on patterns, and then you can scroll down and you can filter for what is in my library. And so there are a ton of great patterns that are already in my library. This is a great way to see what I already have at my disposal if I want to knit something here. Cool, so that is library. And the final thing I want to talk about is the Ravelry favorites function. This is another one that I use all the time, and I'll show you how I use it. So if you go to everything, you just see everything that I've added into my favorites. It's showing you most recent first. It's a bit overwhelming because I apparently have almost 3,000 items in my favorites. So I have organized all of my favorites into bundles. And my bundles are just broad categories. So I have bags, bottoms and dresses, cardigans, children's patterns, crochet. This is specifically crochet items to wear. So it's mostly crochet clothing items, a few accessories, because if it's a crochet blanket or a crochet home item, I've put it down here in the home decor bundle. For me, that is functionally more useful. Then I've got pullovers and I've got projects. So the majority of these categories, I'll show you a little bit how I use my favorites. So the ones that I mainly use are all these broad categories, and I use these constantly. So if I know that I want to make a summer item, which is currently the case, I'm currently looking at summer tops and things to make. I clicked on my summer bundle, and what I will generally do, so this has 6 pages of things. So if I know that I want to knit a summer top, which is the case, let's say right now, I can scroll through all of my summer favorites. But more often than not, I will have a specific yarn that I want to use. In this case, I have, let's say, this new Rowan Cotton Revive, which is a DK weight recycled cotton blend yarn. Then I would go to the top of my summer bundle. I would click here on advanced search. And now this is going to show me everything in my summer bundle, but it's going to enable me to also use the filters. So because I want to use this Rowan Cotton Revive, I would filter for DK weight options. Now, I will also add the filter for worsted weight options, and this is just because, speaking as a person who lives in New Zealand, a lot of our New Zealand DK weights are similar to North American worsted weights. They are close enough in gauge that often you could use a yarn for one or the other. It's not always the case. It depends on the gauge, and it definitely depends on the fabric that you want to achieve. And just feeling this yarn, I feel that it could knit reasonably similar to some of the worsted weight summer yarns that I've encountered before. And so I am going to include worsted weight in this search. That is just a personal choice. So now I am just looking at items that I have already determined that I like because I already added them to my summer bundle. They are specifically summer focused patterns. I know this one looks like a pullover, but there is a t-shirt version. And I have filtered for DK or worsted weight. I don't need any other filters because my bundle was already so specific. And I do this constantly. So whenever I'm coming up on a new project I want to make, a new idea, a new season, I use my own bundles in this way with the advanced search. And this is giving me a ton of great options that I already know that I like and that I know will suit the yarn that I'm using. I want to briefly show you one more of my bundles because it's a little bit different. So all of my other bundles are broad categories that I would want to make. I have this one bundle called Projects, and this is primarily a place where I have put in color inspiration. Or it's a place where, let's say, the knitter has modified the pattern to the extent where I really like what this person has done in their project. Maybe I wouldn't typically choose that pattern if I just saw the pattern page, but maybe I love their specific project and it gave me some kind of inspiration. So let's do advanced search on this as well. This I had in there for ages because I really wanted to make a Surrey alpaca fluffy only ranunculus. I've just made one in the brushed cashmere, so maybe I can remove that from my favorites now that I've already done that. And so yeah, this is basically for color inspiration, or like I said, if I normally wouldn't go for the pattern, but something about this person's project would make me want to knit the pattern. Oh, here's an example. So she has knit a pattern called the Tolsta Tee, and I think that's more of a classic raglan t-shirt, although there are some modification options. But specifically, she added this cute little button detail. And so I saved that in my projects bundle because I love the look of that cute little button. And if I ever were, let's say I wasn't planning on making a Tolsta Tee, but I love this mod, maybe I would be inspired to make something similar to that person's project page. So that is my projects bundle, and that is how I use my favorites and my bundles in general. A couple of just brief other things to mention about Ravelry. I won't go into great detail, but there are other functions and the community has a lot. So there are forums where people host knit-alongs. There are forums for running test knits. There are messages, so you can privately message people. You can find certain people, friends, etc. Find what your friends are making. There are groups. So there are groups around specific yarn companies or designers or themes that people like. And within this forum function, I will also say that as a designer, there are a huge amount of resources in the forums if you want to get into designing, if you've thought about it, but you feel intimidated. When I was new to self-publishing, I read a ton of these Ravelry forums, and it really helps you kind of get all the information you need to go out and publish your own patterns on Ravelry. That kind of brings me to the end of this video. That basically covers what I wanted to say about using Ravelry as a maker, more geared towards as a knitter in this case. But basically, yeah, I think Ravelry is an incredibly unique resource. The database is functionally quite advanced. I mean, the number of filter options are really, really comprehensive, and it's just such a great resource to find patterns that you want to knit, connect with other people, have your personal notebook, keep track of your favorites, your plans, etc. So yeah, if you're someone who in any way felt that there was more to Ravelry than you were gathering, I hope that this video has been helpful, and I am very happy to answer questions as well. If there's anything that I missed or anything you'd like me to go into more detail about, please feel free to ask that question in the comment section. I'm happy to follow up on this video as well with more topics around using Ravelry. Specifically, I would be very happy to do a video about how to dip your toes into being a self-published designer on Ravelry. But otherwise, yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I hope this has been helpful, and I will see you again in the next video. Bye!